The billionaire was annoyed by the clumsy intern, but he could not stop thinking about her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories like this one. Your support truly means the world to us. And tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us begin. After that, let us go back to our main character. The soft hum of conversation filled the air, blending with the quiet clink of silverware and low jazz drifting through the restaurant. Everything about the place felt expensive. The lighting was warm and carefully dimmed. Every plate looked like a work of art, untouched and perfectly arranged. Emily Carter stood just inside the entrance, her fingers tightening around the strap of her worn handbag. She did not belong here. She knew it the moment she caught her reflection in the glass wall. A second-hand navy dress, carefully pressed but slightly faded. Shoes polished again and again to hide the scuffs that never fully disappeared. She swallowed and took a slow breath. You promised yourself you would do this, Emily. This was not a date. At least, that was what she kept telling herself. It was a work dinner, a chance to observe, to learn, to prove that she deserved her internship. One mistake, her supervisor had warned her, and there would be a dozen others ready to take her place. Emily glanced down at her phone again. Table 7. That was what the message said. Table 7. Table 7. Her heart beat faster as she scanned the room, counting softly under her breath while weaving between chairs and servers. At the far end of the restaurant, she spotted it. A small, quiet table, one man seated alone. He looked up from his phone as she approached. He was dressed simply, but everything about him fit perfectly. Dark suit, crisp white shirt, calm, unreadable expression. The kind of man who looked like he belonged anywhere he sat. This must be him, Emily thought. She forced a polite smile and stepped forward before her courage could fail her. Hello. You must be Daniel. I am Emily. I am sorry I am a few minutes late. The man blinked, clearly caught off guard. For a brief moment, it looked like he was about to correct her. Then he paused. Across the table sat Alexander Reed, billionaire, chief executive officer, and the last man in the city who ever expected to be mistaken for someone else. He glanced at the empty chair across from him, then back at the young woman standing there, visibly nervous, hands clasped too tightly in front of her. He should have stopped her. He did not. Yes, he said calmly. Please, have a seat. Relief washed over Emily's face as she slid into the chair, smoothing her dress and letting out a quiet laugh. I always get turned around in places like this, she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Fancy restaurants make me forget how to count. Alexander watched her carefully. Her voice was sincere, unpolished. Nothing like the calculated tones he heard every day in boardrooms and private meetings. So, Emily, he said slowly, you work with the firm? Yes, sir. Intern. Marketing department. I mean, not directly with you, obviously. I am mostly invisible. She smiled awkwardly, but I work hard. Something unexpected stirred in his chest. For the first time that evening, Alexander Reed leaned back in his chair, curiosity replacing annoyance. He had come here for a quiet dinner to escape a day filled with power struggles and forced smiles. Instead, a clumsy intern had just walked into his life by mistake. And somehow, he already knew this small misunderstanding was not going to end quietly at all. The next morning, reality came back fast. Emily Carter woke up before her alarm, staring at the cracked ceiling of her small studio apartment. The radiator rattled softly in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the early winter chill. For a few seconds, her mind was blank. Then the memory of the night before rushed in all at once. The restaurant. The wrong table. The man who called himself Daniel. She sat up slowly, pressing her feet against the cold floor. What had she been thinking? Walking into a high-end restaurant like that, assuming she belonged, talking too much, saying too much, she groaned softly and rubbed her face. Get it together, Emily. You cannot afford mistakes. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A reminder flashed across the screen. Intern Performance Review. 9:30 a.m. Her stomach tightened. Emily dressed quickly, choosing the same navy blazer she wore almost every day. It made her feel professional, even if the lining was worn thin at the elbows. She tied her hair back neatly, slipped her notebook into her bag, and double-checked that her badge was still clipped to the strap. Losing it would cost more than a replacement fee. It would cost trust. The subway ride downtown was crowded and loud. She stood wedged between strangers, gripping a metal pole while rehearsing talking points in her head. She needed this internship, not for pride, not for ambition, for rent, for groceries, for the promise she made to herself after her father passed away, that she would never let instability swallow her again. When she stepped into the glass tower that housed Reed Global, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Everything was quiet, polished, controlled. Employees moved with purpose, heels clicking sharply against marble floors. Emily lowered her gaze, scanning her badge at the security gate and heading straight for the marketing department. She was just an intern here. Temporary, replaceable. By mid-morning, her desk was buried under mock-ups and analytics reports. Emily worked fast, fingers flying across the keyboard, triple-checking every detail. She did not gossip. She did not complain. She smiled when spoken to and stayed invisible when she was not. That was the rule. Still, her mind betrayed her. Every so often, she caught herself thinking about the man from the night before, about the way he listened instead of interrupting, about how he did not look annoyed when she rambled, only curious. It unsettled her. Men like that did not exist in her world. Calm, controlled, unimpressed. During her lunch break, Emily sat alone in the break room, poking at a plastic container of leftover pasta. Around her, full-time employees talked about bonuses, weekend trips, and clients she had only read about in case studies. She did not belong in those conversations either. Just as she was packing up to return to her desk, a message popped up on her screen. It was from her supervisor. Conference room. C. Her heart skipped. Emily straightened her blazer, grabbed her notebook, and walked down the hallway, every step feeling heavier than the last. Her reflection followed her in the glass walls. Small, careful, out of place. She did not know it yet, but upstairs, in an office with a view of the entire city, Alexander Reed was standing by the window, hands in his pockets. He had not slept well. No matter how hard he tried to focus on reports and projections, his thoughts kept drifting back to a nervous intern with honest eyes who had sat at the wrong table and spoken to him like he was just another man. And for reasons he could not explain, that bothered him far more than it should have. By the afternoon, the tension inside Emily Carter had settled into something quieter, heavier. Conference room C turned out to be nothing dramatic. A last-minute briefing. A rushed request for updated figures before an evening meeting. Still, Emily did not relax until she was back at her desk, fingers resting on the familiar edges of her notebook. That notebook mattered to her more than anyone knew. It was cheap, spiral-bound, the cover slightly bent from being shoved into her bag too many times. Inside were neat columns of notes, hand-drawn charts, and margins filled with ideas she had never been brave enough to say out loud. Marketing concepts, brand storytelling angles, questions no one had asked yet. Emily flipped it open now, pen moving quickly as she refined a proposal her supervisor had mentioned in passing. She worked the way she always did, quietly, carefully, as if effort alone could make her presence justified. Around 4 o'clock, the office shifted. People straightened in their chairs. Voices dropped. Someone whispered a name she heard often but had never seen in person. Reed. Emily barely looked up. Executives came and went all the time. They existed on a different floor, a different level of reality. She kept writing, unaware that a pair of calm, observant eyes had stopped just a few desks away. Alexander Reed stood at the edge of the marketing department, listening without being noticed. He did this occasionally, not to intimidate, but to understand how things really worked when he was not in the room. That was when he saw her. Emily Carter was leaning forward, completely absorbed, one hand holding her notebook open, while the other scribbled notes faster than her computer ever could. She did not check her phone. She did not glance around to see who was watching. She simply worked. Alexander recognized that focus immediately. He stepped closer, stopping beside her desk. Emily sensed someone there and looked up instinctively. Her breath caught. It was him, not Daniel, the man from the restaurant. Her mind scrambled to catch up as reality rearranged itself. The posture, the quiet authority, the way the room seemed to bend slightly around his presence. Oh no. She stood so fast her chair scraped softly against the floor. "Sir, I am sorry," she said quickly, heat rushing to her face. "I did not realize you were." Alexander raised a hand, stopping her gently. "Relax," he said. "You are not in trouble." That did not help. Emily nodded, clutching her notebook to her chest like a shield. "I was just finishing the numbers my supervisor asked for." "I can see that," he replied, his gaze dropping briefly to the open pages. "You take your notes by hand." "Yes. I remember things better that way." A pause stretched between them. Around them, the office pretended not to listen. "What are you working on now?" he asked. Emily hesitated. This was the moment she usually stayed quiet. The moment she stayed safe. But something in his expression was different from the night before. More attentive. "It is nothing official," she said carefully. "Just an idea. I was thinking about how the brand could feel more human in smaller markets. Less corporate. More honest." Alexander studied her for a long second. "Honest," he repeated. "Yes," she said softly. "People notice when companies talk at them instead of to them." For the first time, Alexander Reed smiled. Not the practiced expression he used in meetings, but something genuine. "Do not throw that notebook away, Emily Carter," he said. "You might need it sooner than you think." Then he walked on, leaving behind a department buzzing with curiosity and an intern standing frozen at her desk, heart pounding. She did not know what that meant yet, only that a small, ordinary notebook had just been seen. And once something like that was noticed, it was impossible to pretend it did not exist. That evening, the building emptied faster than usual. Emily Carter stayed. The marketing floor grew quiet as lights dimmed row by row. Desks that had buzzed with conversations and ringing phones now sat still, abandoned coffee cups and half-packed bags left behind in a rush to get home. Emily remained at her desk, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on her screen. Alexander Reed's words echoed in her mind. "Do not throw that notebook away." She exhaled slowly and opened it again, smoothing the bent cover with her palm. Her pen hovered for a moment before she began to write. Not numbers this time, ideas. The kind she usually kept to herself. She told herself she was just organizing her thoughts, nothing more. By the time she shut down her computer, it was well past 7. Emily slipped her notebook into her bag and headed for the elevators, the sound of her footsteps unusually loud in the empty hallway. She pressed the button and waited, staring at the glowing numbers above the doors. When they opened, she froze. Alexander Reed was already inside. For a split second, neither of them spoke. He looked just as composed as he had that afternoon, jacket draped neatly over one arm, tie loosened slightly. Less like a billionaire now, more like a man at the end of a long day. "Long day?" he asked casually as she stepped in. "Yes, sir," Emily replied automatically, then winced at herself. He glanced at her, amused. "You do not have to call me that when we are not in a meeting." "Oh," she nodded quickly. "Sorry. Thank you." The doors slid shut, and the elevator began its descent. For a few floors, the silence stretched between them. Emily stared straight ahead, gripping the strap of her bag. She could feel his presence without looking at him, calm and steady in the confined space. "You stayed late," Alexander said. "I wanted to finish what I was working on," she answered. "It is easier to think when it is quiet." He nodded. "That is true." The elevator slowed briefly, then continued down. After a moment, he spoke again. Emily's heart skipped. "Yes?" He turned slightly toward her. "You are right. People can tell when a company hides behind words." She swallowed. "I did not mean to sound critical. I know. That is why it mattered." The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened, revealing the darkened marble floor and the soft glow of security lights. They stepped out together, their footsteps echoing as they walked toward the exit. Outside, the city was alive with movement. Cars rushed past, headlights streaking through the night. Cold air brushed against Emily's face, sharp and refreshing. "I usually have a car waiting," Alexander said, then paused. "But tonight I feel like walking." Emily hesitated, unsure if that was an invitation or simply a statement. He glanced at her. "You are heading to the subway, right?" "Yes, we are going in the same direction." Then, they walked side by side, a comfortable distance between them. No rushing, no awkwardness. Just two people moving through the city. "Tell me something," he said after a block. "Why marketing?" Emily considered the question carefully. "Because stories matter," she said finally. "Numbers tell you what happened. Stories tell you why people care." Alexander looked at her then, really looked at her, the clumsy intern, the wrong table, the quiet determination. At the subway entrance, she stopped. "This is me," he nodded. "Thank you for the walk, Emily Carter." "Thank you," she replied, surprised to mean it. As she descended the stairs, she felt something shift inside her. This was no longer just a misunderstanding or an awkward encounter. It was a second meeting, and somehow, it felt far more dangerous than the first. The days that followed slipped into a strange new rhythm. Emily Carter still arrived early and left late. But something had shifted beneath the routine. The office no longer felt like a place she simply passed through. It felt watched. Not in an uncomfortable way, in a deliberate one. Alexander Reed began appearing more often. Sometimes it was brief. A question during a meeting. A quiet observation delivered without spectacle. Other times, it was nothing more than his presence at the far end of the room, listening while others spoke. He never singled her out in public, but he noticed her. Emily felt it in small ways. The way her supervisor suddenly asked for her input instead of dismissing her notes. The way an idea she had written in the margins of her notebook resurfaced in a discussion days later, rephrased but unmistakably hers. It made her nervous. She told herself not to read into it. People noticed hard work all the time. That was what internships were for. Still, she found herself checking her posture when he walked by, choosing her words more carefully, pretending her hands were not shaking when he asked a question directly. One afternoon, as rain streaked down the tall windows and the city blurred into gray, Alexander stopped at her desk again. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Emily's pulse spiked. "Yes. Of course." He gestured toward a small conference room nearby. Inside, the lights were softer, the space quieter. No audience, no hierarchy on display. "Sit," he said. She did. "I read the draft you sent through the internal system," Alexander said calmly. Emily's stomach dropped. "I did not think anyone would actually read that." It was thoughtful," he interrupted. "Clear. And honest?" She blinked. "Thank you. Why did you hesitate to submit it formally?" Emily hesitated now for a different reason. "Because I am an intern," she said simply, "and interns are supposed to execute, not suggest." Alexander studied her for a moment. That assumption costs companies more than they realize. Something warm and dangerous settled in her chest. From then on, they worked together more often. Brief strategy sessions, quiet reviews after meetings, conversations that began with numbers and ended somewhere far less defined. Emily spoke freely with him in ways she never would have expected. Not because he made promises, but because he listened. He challenged her ideas without dismissing them, asked questions that forced her to think deeper. And Alexander found himself doing something he had not done in years. He looked forward to those conversations. Late one night, after another long day, they found themselves in the elevator again. This time, Emily did not stare at the numbers. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "Building everything around control," she said, instead of trust. The elevator hummed softly as it descended. "Every day," Alexander answered. She nodded. "Me too, just in smaller ways." When the doors opened, neither of them moved right away. There was an unspoken awareness between them now. Not romantic. Not yet. More dangerous. They were crossing lines neither of them had named. And somewhere between late nights, shared ideas, and conversations that lingered too long, Alexander Reed began to realize the truth. The intern who had annoyed him at a restaurant was no longer a mistake. She was becoming a complication he did not want to solve. The reveal did not come gently. It arrived on a Thursday evening, wrapped in polished glass, soft lighting, and the quiet tension of people who understood power. Emily Carter stood near the back of the grand ballroom, fingers clasped tightly around her notebook. She had been told to observe, not participate. This was a high-level corporate event, a quarterly strategy gala attended by executives, board members, and invited press. She was only there to take notes and stay out of the way. That was what she always did. The room buzzed with controlled conversation, men in tailored suits, women in elegant dresses. Laughter that never rose too loud. Everything felt expensive and distant, like a world designed to remind her she did not belong. Emily shifted her weight and glanced down at her notes, grounding herself. Then the lights dimmed slightly. A hush rolled through the room, subtle but immediate. A voice carried across the ballroom, smooth and confident. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. Before we begin, please join me in welcoming the man behind Reed Global's vision and leadership. Our Chief Executive Officer and founder. Emily looked up. Alexander Reed stepped onto the stage. For a moment, her mind refused to connect what her eyes were seeing with what her memory held. The calm man from the elevator. The attentive listener from late-night conversations. The man she had walked beside through city streets like he was ordinary. The applause thundered around her. Her chest tightened as realization crashed down all at once, sharp and unforgiving. Oh, no. This was not just an executive. This was him. Her hands trembled as Alexander began to speak, his voice steady, practiced, powerful. He talked about growth, values, trust, about honesty and leadership and the importance of listening to voices that were often ignored. Each word felt like it landed directly on her. She remembered the restaurant, the wrong table, the way she had spoken freely, carelessly, thinking he was no one who mattered. Heat rushed to her face. People around her nodded, impressed. Some glanced in her direction briefly, then away, as if she were invisible again. But Alexander's gaze shifted. For the smallest fraction of a second, his eyes found hers. There was no surprise in his expression, no apology, only understanding. Emily's breath caught. The applause rose again as he finished, and suddenly the room was alive with movement. People surged forward, eager to speak with him. To be seen, Emily took a step back, then another. She did not wait for the program to end. She slipped out of the ballroom, heart pounding, notebook pressed against her chest like armor. The hallway outside was quiet, carpet muffling her hurried footsteps. She stopped near a tall window, city lights stretching endlessly below. She had been wrong about everything. About him. About their conversations. About the space she thought she had earned. Behind her, footsteps approached. Emily did not turn. "I should have told you," Alexander said quietly. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Yes. You should have." She finally faced him, eyes bright with anger and something dangerously close to humiliation. "Do you know how foolish I feel right now?" she asked. "I spoke to you like you were just another person, like you did not have the power to ruin my career with a sentence." His expression tightened. "I never wanted you to feel that way. But you let me," she said. "You let me believe I was safe." The words hung between them, heavy and unfixable. For the first time since they met, Alexander Reed had no answer. And Emily Carter realized that the biggest mistake of her life was not sitting at the wrong table. It was believing that honesty came without consequences. The fallout came quickly. By the next morning, the office felt different to Emily Carter. Not louder, not colder, just sharper, as if every glance carried weight she could no longer ignore. Whispers traveled faster than emails. People who had never noticed her before now looked twice, curiosity flickering behind polite smiles. She hated it. Emily kept her head down, focusing on her work. but the damage was done. Her name had been spoken in rooms she was never meant to enter, and every time she thought about how that happened, the same image returned to her mind. Alexander Reed, on that stage, confident, untouchable, nothing like the man she thought she knew. Around midday, a meeting invitation appeared on her screen. Private discussion. Executive floor. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She already knew who it was from. Emily almost declined. Instead, she stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked toward the elevators with steady steps that betrayed nothing she felt inside. The executive floor was silent in a way the rest of the building never was. No ringing phones, no rushed conversations. Just glass, steel, and space. She was shown into a quiet office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Alexander was already there. He did not offer a seat. Neither did she. "I wanted to explain," he began. Emily shook her head. "No. You wanted to control the timing." His jaw tightened slightly. "That is not fair." She met his gaze, refusing to look away. "Is it not? You knew exactly who you were. You knew who I was. And you let me walk around thinking I was speaking freely. I valued that honesty," he said. "That is why I stayed quiet." Emily laughed softly, without humor. "You stayed quiet because it benefited you." The words landed harder than she expected. Alexander exhaled slowly. "I never intended to humiliate you." "Intent does not erase impact," she replied. "You did not give me a choice. You took it." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "Do you know what it is like," Emily continued, "to spend your entire life measuring your words? To always wonder if one mistake will cost you everything? Last night, I realized I had been honest with the one person who could destroy me the fastest." "I would never do that," Alexander said firmly. She looked at him then, really looked at him. "That is the problem. I should not have to trust your character to feel safe." The truth settled in his expression. This was not about romance, not about pride. This was about power. Emily took a step back. "I cannot keep doing this," she said quietly. "Whatever this is." He stiffened. "Doing what?" "Pretending we are equals when we are not. Letting people think I am special because of proximity instead of merit." She reached into her bag and pulled out her badge, unclipping it slowly. "I want to be judged on my work," she said. "Not because I sat at the wrong table or spoke to the wrong man." Alexander stared at the badge in her hand. "You are walking away from an opportunity," he said. "No," Emily replied. "I am walking toward my dignity." She placed the badge gently on the desk between them. For a moment, Alexander looked like he might say something else, something sharper, something final. Instead, he said nothing. Emily turned and walked out, heels echoing softly down the hallway. She did not look back. For the first time in years, Alexander Reed stood alone in his own office, realizing that all his power meant nothing when the person he respected most chose to leave rather than bend. And somewhere deep inside, he understood the truth. This was the moment he failed her. And if he wanted even the smallest chance to make it right, words would no longer be enough. The silence she left behind did not fade. For days after Emily Carter walked out of his office, Alexander Reed moved through his world like a man slightly out of sync with himself. Meetings continued. Decisions were made. Numbers rose and fell. None of it felt urgent. What replayed instead was a single image. Emily placing her badge on his desk. Not angry, not dramatic. Resolved. That was what unsettled him most. He had seen people leave before. They always asked for something on the way out. A favor. A recommendation. A door left open. Emily asked for nothing. By the end of the week, Alexander did something he had not done in years. He canceled a board meeting, the room filled with confusion and quiet resistance. "We will reschedule," he said evenly. He returned to his office alone and opened the internal archive. Every draft, every proposal, every note Emily Carter had ever submitted during her internship. He read them slowly. Not as a chief executive officer. As a listener, patterns emerged. Ideas about local trust, about brand voice, about removing polish where it hid truth. Marginal notes that asked questions no one else bothered to ask. This was not proximity. This was merit. That afternoon, Alexander sent a single email. Not to Emily, to the board. The emergency meeting took place 2 days later. Executives filled the long table, tension sharp in the air. They expected a market issue, a legal concern, a hostile takeover. Alexander stood at the head of the room, calm and deliberate. "I want to talk about culture," he began, "and about how we silence the people who see us most clearly." A few brows furrowed. He continued anyway. He spoke about hierarchy, about fear disguised as professionalism, about the cost of control when it replaced trust. Then, without hesitation, he projected a slide onto the screen. Emily's work, her ideas, her frameworks, her language. Some board members shifted uncomfortably. "This was created by an intern," Alexander said. "Not because she lacked seniority, but because we never gave her the room to speak." Someone cleared their throat. "Are you suggesting?" "I am correcting a mistake," he replied. "One I made." Silence followed. "Effective immediately," he said. "Read Global will pilot a new initiative based on this framework. And we will credit its author publicly." There were objections, concerns, warnings. Alexander listened to all of them. Then he made his choice. The announcement went live the following morning. Press release, internal memo, public acknowledgement. Emily Carter's name was there. No embellishment, no softening, just the truth. Across the city, Emily sat at a small kitchen table, refreshing her email out of habit more than hope. She had begun applying elsewhere. Smaller firms, places where anonymity felt safer. Then her phone vibrated. She read the headline once, then again. Her breath caught. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, a knock sounded at her door. Emily opened it slowly. Alexander Reed stood there. No suit, no entourage, just a folded folder in his hands. "I am not here to ask you back," he said quietly. "And I am not here to defend myself." He extended the folder. "I am here to return what was always yours." Inside were her ideas, printed, credited, untouched. "I failed you," Alexander continued, "and I do not expect forgiveness, but I will not allow my silence to cost you what you earned." Emily looked at him for a long moment. This was not money. This was accountability. And for the first time since she walked away, she felt the ground beneath her steady again. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way real change often is. Emily Carter did not return to Read Global right away. She did not rush toward the spotlight that suddenly knew her name. Instead, she took a breath she had been holding for years. Mornings became slower. Coffee at her kitchen table. Her notebook open again. No longer hidden in a bag but resting where she could see it. She wrote without fear now. Not to impress. Just to think. The industry noticed. Emails arrived from firms she had never applied to. Invitations to talk, to collaborate, to be heard. Each one felt surreal, but grounding at the same time. Her work stood on its own. No shadows, no favors. One afternoon, she received a message from an unfamiliar address. Alexander Reed. She did not open it immediately. When she finally did, it was brief. No agenda, no request. Just an invitation, coffee, neutral ground, no expectations. Emily considered it longer than she cared to admit. Then she agreed. They met at a small cafe far from glass towers and marble floors. No assistants, no titles. Just two people sitting across from each other, hands wrapped around warm cups. Alexander spoke first. "I am learning how to listen again," he said. Emily studied him. He looked different. Not smaller. Just quieter. "I am not here to reopen anything," she said. "I just want clarity." "You deserve that," he replied. In this Rita, and in that, they talked. About work. About boundaries. About what it meant to lead without erasing others. There was no apology left to give. That part had already happened. What remained was choice. At the end of the conversation, Alexander stood and extended his hand. "Whatever you decide next," he said, "I will respect it." Emily shook his hand, steady and certain. That night, she walked home feeling lighter than she had in years. Months later, the pilot initiative launched publicly. It succeeded not because it carried a powerful name, but because it spoke honestly to people who were tired of being spoken down to. At the launch event, Emily stood beside Alexander, not behind him. When asked how they met, she smiled. "At the wrong table," she said. The laughter that followed was warm, not dismissive. Later, as the room emptied and the city lights blinked on one by one, Alexander turned to her. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. That night, Emily thought about the fear, the humiliation. Then she shook her head. "No," she said. "It was the best mistake I ever made." He smiled, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had finally learned the cost of silence and the value of truth. Some stories end with romance. This one ended with something stronger. Mutual respect, earned trust, and the quiet understanding that love, like leadership, only works when both people are willing to stand in the light together.